Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Produce Study Training Nuts and Bolts of the SCD. We are glad to have you today. I want to make sure everyone can hear me. So for those of you attending, if you don't mind, some of you at least putting your hand up to make sure that we have everybody on the phone who can hear us. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Sujata and Zarala. I appreciate it. Okay, we will go ahead and get started then. I have this is Michelle, Jeff Para, and I have some general announcements, and then we will get started with the training. Just if you attended our last training, we're going to do things similarly. First, we will hold questions until the end again. So at the end, if you have a question you would like to state verbally, please just put your hand up and we will unmute your microphone and you will be able to ask that at the end. During the training, if you have a question, if you'd like to just type it in to the chat box, we will also get to those at the end too, and we can read those. So you're welcome to do that either way, but if you put it in the chat box, we won't get to it until the end. The webinar is being recorded and we will post it on YouTube like we did the last one. We will send a link to this recording after it is posted. That should come out to you tomorrow. And please note that all dietitians at your site are required to view this training. So it is not required for coordinators and physicians. It is required for dietitians. However, we think it will be beneficial to everyone if you're on the call. And the training log will be sent tomorrow as well. That's online, just like the last one as well. Please sign and submit it to get credit for your attendance at the training. And lastly, CPEUs are being issued for this training as well, and we will send those certificates along with your other certificates that the dietitians will be getting. Okay, that's all my announcements, and we can get started. Kim?
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. I'm Kim Brawley, and I'm a pediatric dietitian at Seattle Children's Hospital in our IBD center. I've been working on the SCD diet in research form for the last 4 years, and it has been a joy to do. And we are very excited to bring to you kind of the first clinical training that we have in the form of a study, the Produce study. So thank you all for joining us. Today's presenters will be myself, Kaylee Nguyen, nurse practitioner at Lucille Packard Children's Hospitals, who has abundant history and clinical practice using the SCD. Giselle Woodward and Sherry Pilley are our SCD parent partners who have been an active role in making this study happen, and they know the SCD well. And lastly, Catalina Barenblum is an SCD patient who has been on the SCD for 6 years, and she's been a tremendous resource as well. So we'll jump to the next slide. For the sake of time, I won't read through these objectives, but our hope today is that you will leave with a better understanding of the SCD and a more regulated or regimented way of implementing it in clinic, and actually that will be consistent across the board with all of the sites that are part of the Produce study. We're hoping to also use the Produce resources in clinical practice, not just for this study in the future. So please feel free to do that as well. Now
this is Kaylee. I'm going to talk to you about kind of the art and science of assessing families that might be interested in the SCD or are referred to you to enroll in the study. The goal is essentially to look for factors that will help the child succeed on the diet and identify barriers that would impede success. If the scale is tipped with too many barriers, you might need to talk with the clinician who referred the patient, because you really want to set the family up for success. So we'll start with nutritional status. In order to inform how you counsel a family, it's really important to know how the child presents. Do they have growth failure because of severe ileal Crohn's disease, or in some cases with patients who have ulcerative colitis, are they overweight? So if they're overweight to start, you might not want to recommend high caloric dips with fruit or whole fat to make your yogurts as you normally would for a kid who is underweight. So, and a good diet history is really important because you want to know, of course, what does the child eat now, because this will inform how you recommend SCD substitution. So for example, if the child starts out eating Captain Crunch cereal with milk for breakfast every day, you might start with suggesting like a grain-free granola with homemade nut yogurt to start, and not a vegetable and cheese omelet, right? And then you want to talk about who cooks and how much time do they have to prepare food. Because with this diet, there is a lot of food preparation, as all the parents will tell you. There's a lot of food preparation on the part of the caretaker, especially for somebody who's just trying to figure out the SCD at first. So if in discussion with the family, you find out that the mom is a single mom who works full-time with 3 other children to feed, you might be concerned that having one child on the SCD might tip the balance for the family. And in that case, you would talk to the clinician, or you would talk a lot about how the mom can be helped by extended friends or extended family and friends to share in the cooking. As far as food allergies, it's important because if you have a few food allergies and you're eliminating like 2 to 3 foods, that's fine. And usually you can succeed very well with that. But if a child has so many food intolerances and allergies that they can only consume 10 foods, that's probably not going to make the SCD very doable. Same thing with picky eaters. Are they picky, but could you substitute chicken nuggets with like chicken, just fried chicken, or pan-fried chicken with a coating? But if the child is so inflexible that they won't budge on how the food looks or tastes, then that might be very difficult. For the purposes of the study, vegans are excluded just because there's not enough foods to be able to meet nutritional needs. But vegetarians, I have many of them in my practice, and they all do very, very well. And then one of the most important things to assess as the dietitian is the ability of the child to stick to the diet. So what is motivating the child? Are they too young to care and the SCD will simply become a part of their life? Or are they a teen who's like really motivated not to be in the hospital, or they just want to be well enough to do the football, to be on the football team? So the stronger their motivation, the longer and more likely they'll stick to the diet. And then lastly, the resources of the financial kind are really important. Well, not really important. It's not make or break, but it is important in that a lot of whole, fresh, unprocessed foods, as well as basics such as honey and nut flours and cheeses are not inexpensive. So you want to make sure there are some financial resources. So next, Kim.
We've created for you guys an abundance of resources that we will use for education purposes for the produce study. And one of those, so next slide, yeah. Our main hub, or our kind of gold standard for where we will be referring patients to, is the nimble.org website. And I will show you how to access the produce materials, but you can see here through the arrows, Nimble, produce, and then under produce, there's resources to download. So I won't go through all of them in detail, but many of these resources will be discussed today in our presentation. They were also part of the pre-work for this webinar, so hopefully some of you were able to look through those. Before meeting with patients and enrolling patients into the produce study, it's very important to familiarize yourself with these resources so you can adequately meet the needs the family has at the time. The Nimble book is another resource, and Dr. Suskin has donated these books to each site. If you don't know where yours is or you have not gotten one, please let us know and we'll make sure to send you one. Other resources that we'll talk about today are the SCD Families Facebook page. Sherry Pilley will be talking about that. Meals Made Simple is an excellent cookbook by Danielle Walker, and Giselle Woodward, through her Woodward Foundation, has kindly donated all of the sites a copy of the cookbook. Danielle Walker goes into detail about SCD recipes and also paleo recipes and various others, but she does a good job of indicating when it's SCD legal. Giselle went through this book and combed through it in detail and only found 2 recipes that had a couple ingredients that we are not allowing on the study. So we will be in touch about what those are in the future. Historically and currently, Breaking the Vicious Cycle is a book and a website. This book was created by Elaine Gottschall, who you'll learn more about. The website Breaking the Vicious Cycle is a great resource, but like many of the resources on the web, you'll find that a lot of them contradict each other because the SCD has never been implemented or standardized. So that's why our gold standard is going to be the nimble.org website for all of the resources and to refer patients to. Next slide. Here's the nimble.org homepage. It has a lot of information on diet therapy in general and IBD, but you can see up in the right-hand corner on the homepage, the produce logo is there. You'll click on the produce logo, next page. And then you'll see this section that says already participating in the produce study. Right below it, it says download study materials. Just click on that and then you can access all of those handouts that we've created for you. Next slide. So amongst the produce resources, you will find this handout, which is a summary of the SCD and what is allowed and what's not allowed, and you might find to print it out for families would be really useful in counseling. Next slide. So now I'll just give you a brief overview of the SCD and the modified SCD, which are the two arms that patients will be randomized into during the study. So the specific carbohydrate diet is a grain-free, low-sugar, and nutritionally complete diet if followed correctly. And Kim will go through a little bit more about that later. It was developed in the 1920s by Dr. Sidney Haas, who at the time developed it to treat celiac disease. And of course, the diet for celiac disease has been modified over time. But in 1968, Elaine Gottschall, who was at that time a mom and a housewife, put her daughter on the diet as a last-ditch attempt to avoid surgery for severe ulcerative colitis. And on the SCD, Elaine's daughter actually went into remission and was able to avoid surgery. And Elaine was so inspired by the diet and how it affected her daughter's health that she went back to school to get not one, but 2 science degrees. And then 20 years later, around 1987, published this book with her husband, and at that time was how she popularized the diet. With the internet, the interest in the diet and kind of the word of it has spread, but the growth has been due to mostly anecdotal reports of symptom improvement, and there has been very limited research on it until now, and we're just starting to do a lot more research on it. Next. You're all dietitians, so you're very familiar with carbohydrates and how they're metabolized to go from a complex form or polysaccharide into oligosaccharides, then disaccharides, then monosaccharides, right? So as polysaccharides, there's salivary amylase and pancreatic enzymes and enzymes from brush border membranes to kind of break it down from, I'm sorry, the picture kind of got messed up, but break it down from many sugar molecules connected by many bonds to 2 sugar molecules connected by 1 bond in the form of disaccharides. And then even as disaccharides, it has to be further broken down into monosaccharides before it can be absorbed. And these enzymes that digest, for example, the maltose, lactose, and sucrose into the combination of glucose and fructose and galactose are located in the brush border membranes of the small intestine. So remember that as we move on to the next slide. So this book that talks about the SCD is called Breaking the Vicious Cycle, and how carbohydrates play a role in the vicious cycle is depicted here. You can see at the center, it's proposed that there's small intestinal mucosal injury in inflammatory bowel disease, which then leads to carbohydrate malabsorption down below. And because you have poor absorption and breakdown of the carbohydrates, those carbohydrates go on to the latter parts of the small intestines and large intestine to feed the bacteria, causing bacterial overgrowth. And that bacterial fermentation causes increase in byproducts such as nitrogen and methane and hydrogen and carbon dioxide, which then causes more bacteria and more mucosal injury. And at the same time, when you don't absorb the carbohydrates well, it causes an osmotic effect and it draws water into the intestines, causing more chronic diarrhea.
So when you eliminate complex carbohydrates or carbohydrates that are not well absorbed well, you break that cycle, you stop the feeding frenzy, you reduce bacterial overgrowth, reduce byproducts, reduce the diarrhea, and so on. And that's what they mean by breaking the vicious cycle. Next slide. So this is the basics of the SCD. Just what can you eat? Again, like all popular diets these days, it focuses on fresh, whole, unprocessed foods. And you'll hear the term legal, and throughout the rest of the presentation, you'll hear the terms legal and illegal, which is the lingo that was introduced in the book and then adopted in the SCD community on and offline. So legal means stuff that can be enjoyed, and illegal means stuff that you can't, that you should avoid. So you can have all fresh meats, fish and shellfish, both fresh and frozen, but you can't have the packaged and deli and preserved meats, which have a lot of illegal ingredients. You can have most vegetables except for the starchy kinds like potatoes and corn, and the mucilaginous ones such as taro and okra or cactus. You can have most all the fruits except for green bananas, plantains, and young coconut. Of course, when green bananas and young coconut become ripe, all those starches are metabolized or changed into sugar. So you can have the yellow bananas with spots and the ripened coconut that's brown. And you can have all fats and oils, including butter, that we kind of want to limit the highly processed oils like canola and corn. You can have cheeses that are aged for more than 30 days, but not the soft, unaged cheeses like cream cheese and cottage cheese. Brie is one example of an aged cheese that's not hard, so that is legal on the SCD. The SCD really encourages homemade lactose-free yogurt. It does allow for lactose-free milk in the latter, more advanced stages, and also homemade nut milk that doesn't have any stabilizers or thickeners. And it does not allow for regular milk or commercial yogurts because almost all of those contain lactose. Nuts and seeds are allowed, but the flavored, sugared, or packaged nuts and seeds are not because they have a lot of anti-caking agents to keep it from sticking. Honey is the single source of sweetener aside from fruit. And you really can't have any other things like maple syrup, etc., except for the purpose of this study in the modified arm, maple syrup is allowed. And then legumes such as lentils and beans, as long as it's soaked for 12 to 24 hours to remove some of those extra starches, are allowed. And then it does not allow any grains whatsoever, even the gluten-free and ancient grains. So there is a lot to eat, and you can definitely have a well-balanced diet that meets nutritional needs. Go ahead, next slide. In the modified arm of the SCD, we have included some additional foods. The study team wanted to add these foods as a way to just compare the differences in response. What if we added a few foods that are not traditionally considered legal? How would that change a patient's response? And these particular foods were chosen because in our collective experiences between the parents and the clinicians, these foods have been well tolerated by patients on the SCD as they began to kind of include other foods later on. And these foods would add variety and options for many recipes for the patient, and it might help them stay on it longer. So it includes, as far as grains, oats, organic brown and white rice, and cocoa, and sweet potatoes, excuse me. And then others include maple syrup and cocoa. For the research purposes, patients would be required to consume a minimum of 3 servings of any of those grain items or the combination of them each week, because we need to be able to compare the different arms, right? We would also want to limit the patients to a maximum of 6 servings of each of those grain items or combination of items, because we need to keep them on a limited carbohydrate diet, and they can't just be eating sweet potatoes and rice every day at every meal all the time. And then as far as maple syrup and cocoa, we also presented a minimum of 2 tablespoons a week and a maximum of half a cup a week for each of those items. We'll go back to Kim now.
Tricks and treats of the SCD and modified SCD. We've compiled kind of our experiences and what we've found to be helpful both in clinic and at home. And we'll start with some recipe. Well, meal options with breakfast. So kind of example, SCD meals could look like a smoothie. We want this to be high calorie, and we'll get into weight loss soon. But something like the SCD yogurt made from full fat milk, even heavy cream, or coconut milk from a can, or avocado with some sort of added protein like a nut butter or egg whites, as well as a fruit. And you can get creative. You could substitute traditional crepes with coconut flour crepes and add your favorite toppings. Another option could be a egg omelet with veggies, aged cheese, salsa avocado, or even SCD legal bacon or sausage. Many kids love homemade SCD sausage made from either turkey, pork, beef, whatever they prefer. And another popular favorite is grainless granola made from nuts and seeds. Coconut flakes can be added, mixed with various dried fruits, olive oil, and honey, and then baked in the oven. It makes for a delicious high-calorie snack and breakfast. Next slide. Examples of lunch. The easiest is definitely leftovers from dinner, but some kids really like to be simple for lunch with like a cheese and meat platter, some sort of sandwich if they can find a bread that they like made from almond, coconut, pecan flour, filled with tuna or peanut butter and jelly or egg salad. You could also do a standalone item like cauliflower rice stir fry, which is pretty easy to cook up. And you can do like something like the picture shows, an open face lettuce wrap or bowl with kind of Thai Asian dressing and beef or chicken or whatever meat you have inside. Next slide. And then dinner, I truly feel is the easiest and the most consistent with what we would typically think. A lot of this is thinking outside of the box, which we do with as dietitians, but how can we make it kid friendly as well as the trick? Kids would, some of them like ribeye steak or salmon with cauliflower puree to make it similar to mashed potato consistency with butter, or SCD cream cheese with a grilled veggie. Something like in the third picture, your choice of meat sauce or lentil sauce over zoodles or spaghetti squash. Pesto chicken with steamed and grilled veggies. Hamburger wrapped in lettuce with all the toppings aside from a bun. Or soups. Soups, I feel like, are one of the easiest options to have for meals that are SCD compliant. So squash, lentils, bean, Italian wedding can all work on the SCD. Next slide. Snacks. This is one of my favorite topics. Snacks are a necessity on the SCD, and we'll get into like meal patterns and snack patterns. I feel like snacks give kids a sense of normalcy and consistency as well as overall satiety, so they can last longer. Nut-based granola we talked about. Another example is various fruits with nut butter or sun butter, baked kale chips, or any other type of legal baked veggie, like beet chips are great. For those that are on the modified, or for our patients when they go onto the modified SCD arm, you could do baked sweet potato chips, tuna salad on celery, or with another veggie like carrots. Veggies with legal ranch dressing, lime pistachio melts, which is just kind of pureed or blended pistachios, chopped pistachios in a food processor with limes, honey drizzled over the top and made into kind of like a bar. You could really do that with any nut. Parmesan crisps give kids that more of a sense of kind of like goldfish crackers. You could cut it into shapes or cut it out with little cookie cutter type things. Lara bars are a popular favorite, and we'll get into pre-packaged items soon. Dried pineapple chips or any other dried fruit. Many families will tell you one of their favorite kitchen toys is a dehydrator so that they can make dried fruit at home. And lastly, the option we have here is a grilled cheese sandwich on almond bread. Next slide. And treats. I always say treats are a necessity on this diet, as this is where a bulk of the calories can come from. And all kids, right, love dessert. So we have baked pears here drizzled with honey. You could do baked apple and cinnamon as well. Mixed berry frozen yogurt made from SCD yogurt. A lot of families will also make this with canned coconut milk, and they'll freeze it and then put pureed fruit into it and kind of whip it up. It's delicious. Almond cookies with orange zest is another example. Snickerdoodle cookies are a popular favorite. You can see here on the right, this beautiful cashew cheesecake was actually made for me by one of our patients. I say a true act of love because it's all coconut or cashew butter with a nut-based crust, marbled blueberries on top, and beautiful whipped cream, like frosting almost on the top, which you can see. We all enjoyed that in clinic. Key lime pistachio truffles, grape jello squares, frozen banana, for example, with honey and walnuts. And for those that will be on the modified SCD, they will have the option of having cocoa powder and maple syrup as well. So they could also add some very creative options like chocolate banana bread or something like that. Pre-packaged foods on the SCD are both awesome at making life easier and convenient, but we also have to be careful with these. So I love to say it's possible to be a junk food SCD follower, just like it's possible to be a junk food vegan or vegetarian. And that some kids over the years have come to me and I've seen, okay, all they're eating are the prepackaged SCD items, whether it's dried fruit, turkey in a bag, that works, Larbars, cheese sticks, the list goes on. And it's easy for the diet to be nutritionally lacking if that's the case. However, there is a time and place for these items in a pinch or to have a few times a week. On the nimble.org website, we have a section titled Prepackaged Foods, and you can look there. We've put up a few common items that currently have legal ingredients in them, which brings me to the next bullet point, are that prepackaged SCD foods have the risk of containing unknown ingredients and the risk of the ingredient list always changing. So I always educate families to really read the label carefully, not just once, but every time that they get this item at the store, which can be tedious, but a quick glance just to make sure that the ingredients are legal. One example of this was actually as we were preparing our favorite brand list for the produce study, we were looking through some favorite dressing recipes and our parents saw right away that the ingredient list had changed, deeming these products no longer viable options to have for SCD, which was unfortunate.
And I would add that, Kim, I think that that goes for pre-made food at the stores like Whole Foods too. Like rotisserie chicken at Costco about 7 years ago was legal, but 7 years ago they started adding potato starch to it, so then it became not legal. So yes, that goes for prepared foods from the stores as well.
Yes, and chicken you have to be careful as well because a lot of chicken is injected with a saline solution that you would never know. And Costco does have one of those examples of the saline solution in the chicken. So organic is best when able.
Next slide, sorry. Okay, I'm going to talk a little about SCD yogurt. Some of you might know that I have been cooking the SCD for my husband with Crohn's disease for about 13 years and have become an expert on the SCD, at least at our hospital at LPCH and the surrounding community. And I make yogurt, oh gosh, probably a gallon of yogurt every week, probably at the beginning of the diet. So it's very, very easy. It sounds very tedious at first, but it is not. The yogurt is a very important part of the SCD because it's versatile and you can incorporate it into many recipes, and it's also the best source of probiotics on the diet. Because remember that we're breaking the vicious cycle, starving out the bad bacteria, and hopefully wanting to repopulating with beneficial bacteria. So for making the yogurt, the first thing you do is heat the milk. Sorry, these photos got a little turned around. First, you heat the milk, and you can heat it in like a mason jar in a water bath or directly into the pot, which just means more scraping later on. You can use cow's milk or coconut milk or almond milk or goat's milk, any legal or any milk that can make yogurt. Then after you heat it to 180 degrees, you want to cool it, and you can speed up the process by putting it into an ice water bath or just leaving it at room temperature, and it may take several hours to reach 110 degrees. After it's at an ideal temperature for the thermophilic bacteria that ferments lactose to make yogurt, you would add the starter, and the recommendation is 2 to 5% of the milk volume. So if you have 500 milliliters of milk you're trying to make into yogurt, you need to add about 15 milliliters of the starter. And we'll talk about the starter in just a minute. It's basically the bacteria source that will start eating the yogurt and fermenting the yogurt into, or the milk into yogurt. And after you put in the culture, you want to keep it at about 110 degrees, this mixture, for it to incubate or ferment. And for that, you need a constant heat source like a yogurt maker, which is commercially available, or I'll tell you of some other heat sources in a little bit. And after 24 hours, all that lactose is eaten by the bacteria, and the lactose turns into galactose and glucose, and now the yogurt is SCD legal. It is more sour than the store-bought yogurts because the store-bought yogurts are only fermented for about 6 to 8 hours. And there are some lactose-free yogurts on the market, but almost all of them have stabilizers such as pectin, which is not SCD legal. And after the milk has become yogurt, you would remove it from the heat and refrigerate it, and then you can strain it. The picture on the far bottom left, you can strain it as desired. So first 24 hours after you strain it, it might be the consistency of Greek yogurt. If you strain it in the refrigerator for, say, 72 hours, it might look like cream cheese. You strain it a little more, it might look like paneer cheese or farmer's cheese, the dry curd farmer's cheese. Next slide. So we just talked about starters for the yogurt. Breaking the vicious cycle actually says that bifidus or bifidobacterium should be avoided on the SCD. And the reasons are pretty complex. I won't go into it now due to our time limitations, but avoidance of bifidus is why we choose these very specific cultures to make SCD yogurt, because they do not contain bifidus. And that includes Butterworks Farm yogurt, which is only available on the East Coast. The Yogourmet brand makes some freeze-dried yogurts, and you can use any color of the freeze-dried yogurt as a starter. And then you can locally, or at least in California, and really all over the United States, you can buy Dannon plain whole milk. It must be whole milk, not the non-fat or the low-fat, but the whole milk yogurt to use as a starter. As for heat sources or yogurt makers, really any constant heat source is acceptable, such as a fruit dehydrator or an oven with a pilot light on, anything that will keep the yogurt about 105 to 110 degrees. When I've traveled to visit my family, sometimes I'll forget the yogurt maker, and I've used a DSL router. I'll just put the whole jar of milk that I've cooked on the router, cover it with a bunch of towels, and the router doesn't work as well, but my yogurt turns out just fine. And then as far as popular yogurt makers, if a family wants to invest in one, there are many brands on the market. The most popular one in the SCD community is Yogourmet on the very right, but it's $60. And then the middle one is called Dash, and that's about $30, and recently was on Groupon for about $19. And then the Euro Cuisine are the small little individual jars of yogurt, and that's about $30 as well. Next slide. And then these are just the approved videos on the internet that we have viewed as a group and approved. You can see on this list that the first two versions are the standard way to make SCD yogurt using cow's milk or goat's milk. The third is using coconut milk, and the fourth is using almond milk. And there will be a more detailed handout on your yogurt making online in the produce toolkit for you to use. And then we've made specific notes for modifications that might be needed for the purposes of the study to make sure, so make sure that you reference your patients to these videos in the future. Next slide. Probiotics. So restoring the flora of the GI tract with beneficial bacteria is one really important part of the SCD. Remember that the book was written more than 30 years ago when there wasn't as much known about the gut microbiota, but the right idea was there. So the best way to get probiotics on the SCD is really by using the yogurt. So you're talking in an 8-ounce cup of homemade SCD yogurt. it contains 500 to 700 CFUs of bacteria. Versus if you buy a capsule or a satchel at the store, you might get 10 to 15 billion per serving. Plus, you know with the yogurt that all the bacteria is alive and thriving. Otherwise, the yogurt would taste bad. The SCD does encourage the consumption of sauerkraut and kimchi and other fermented vegetable products that are, as long as it's made with legal ingredients. However, especially those starting out on the diet, the kombucha and kefir are not recommended. And why that is because some of you might know that kombucha and kefir are fermented using a SCOBY, which is a symbiotic community of bacteria and yeast. And the yeast in it is what's not allowed on the diet. So just like bifidobacterium, yeast is not recommended. So yes, to sauerkraut and kimchi, no to kombucha and kefir, at least for the purposes of the study. And yes, if for some reason your patient cannot tolerate yogurt or won't eat it and won't eat fermented vegetables, then there are bifidus-free probiotics that we've listed on the SCD supplements handout, and that's available to you.
As part of our tips and tricks, we wanted to give you some tips on becoming a savvy SCDer. Kaylee and I use both of these, or a lot of these techniques in clinic visits, whether it's the first visit or follow-up visits. One of those key tricks is label reading. And as many of you know, we have computers, and many of you probably use computers in your clinic room, where you can pull up a Google image search, look through the label, and decide, is this like a legal or illegal food, or what ingredients are legal or illegal. Same thing can be done with a recipe, which we'll talk about, and as a legal recipe as well as an SCD recipe, looking at the ingredients, deciding if these ingredients are valid or if they are not legal on the diet. And I think families need a lot of help with this guidance, as we like to assume a lot of people know how to use food labels. Many of them don't. Or maybe they're looking at the wrong area or thing, or they might just be confused about certain ingredients. Next slide. So the first one we'll look at is a Google image search for a specific product. So Kaylee and I looked up mayonnaise, which is a very popular condiment amongst our teens, or our kids anyways. The first one that popped up was the Best Foods Real Mayo, which includes soybean oil, water, eggs, egg yolks, vinegar, salt, sugar, lemon juice, calcium disodium, EDTA, and natural flavors. So the last four ingredients for sure are food additives and are illegal on the diet. And sugar is also illegal on the diet. So this would not be a good option. And then I would then pull up the next image of SCD mayonnaise. Again, you have to sift through the options that were there on the image search. But we found Spectrum Canola Mayo, which includes expeller pressed canola, oil, pasteurized eggs, filtered water, honey, distilled white vinegar, sea salt, mustard, and lemon juice concentrate. So this would be a legal item. Lemon juice or juice concentrate on the SCD is not legal, as it's usually reconstituted with sugar. However, for this mayonnaise product, it's used as the lemon additive and not as the sugar, so it would be a legal option. Next slide.
All right, so at most of the SCD consult visits that I do, I show families how to adapt recipes. This is one recipe that a patient and I found together some time ago from allrecipes.com, and it had 5,000 excellent reviews, which I didn't list here, but trust me. And chicken tikka masala is a really popular food because I work with a lot of South Asians here in the Bay Area. So I just pulled up the list of ingredients here, and you can see that there are, most of those foods are completely legal and a few are not, which I have highlighted. So for the yogurt that's bulleted, you can, of course, replace, that's easy, replace with SCD homemade yogurt. And you can see that on the right-hand side, 1 can of tomato sauce. So canned tomato sauce are usually not legal. unless you can find one that is, and there are some options, but that can be easily remedied with just pureeing a tomato to make 8 ounces or a couple of tomatoes. And then the heavy cream here, instead of using heavy cream, I often recommend a mixture of half coconut cream and half cashew cream, which you can make with just pureeing cashew and water into a creamy consistency. If you replace with 100% coconut cream, this tastes too coconutty. And if a family, and if it's available and the family plans ahead, they can even make cream yogurt using heavy whipping cream in that yogurt instructions that I showed you instead of milk. And then they would have heavy cream yogurt and they can replace with the heavy cream. So, and it tastes delicious. I've made it multiple times to freeze and it tastes just perfect and families really enjoy it. So instead of serving it with rice, like regular rice or naan, you would serve it with cauliflower rice or a favorite vegetable such as zucchini. And of course, in the modified arm, you can serve it with rice, brown rice, or white rice. Next. Okay, so macaroni and cheese is a very popular request by kids. And you can see that when you search SCD macaroni and cheese on Google, you'll get a lot of hits. I picked this one just because the picture looked really delicious. But unfortunately, when I reviewed the ingredients list, there were so many illegal ingredients, such as oil spray, which you can definitely replace. Heavy cream, again, you can replace. Cream cheese, you can try to replace with filtered yogurt or strained yogurt, and then garlic powder, which is not legal, but you can replace with fresh garlic. So even though there are a lot of illegal ingredients, we can again substitute and make it work, and it worked out very well even after substitution. And then there have been a lot more SCD legal bakeries over the years that offers prepared SCD legal foods and ships to various places in the United States. And you can certainly check these out and encourage your families to check them out. They are not the most inexpensive items, but definitely, if can be afforded, is a big lifesaver.
So the stages of the produce or of the SCD get a lot of talk. And for those of you that have done some education and research on the SCD, I would say that this is one of the topics that can be the most confusing and inconsistent. So next slide. For those that are maybe not as familiar with the diet, the theory behind the stages, there are a couple, and one of them is that the stages may cause potentially beneficial changes in the fecal microbiome. They also may help with symptom management, kind of moving from more easily to digest foods to more advanced foods. The stages have evolved over time based on the SCD community's experience and varied experiences. Up until this point, there's no clear evidence to suggest these are necessary, but there's strong belief in the SCD community. Therefore, we are including the stages, or our version of the stages, as part of the study design. And we will talk about kind of the variation that we've used for it in the next slide. So our stage 1, we're calling the beginner's SCD so that it's not confused with all of the various other stage 1s out there. And Elaine Gottschall does, in her book, Breaking the Vicious Cycle, does talk about kind of staging foods or kind of an intro diet, foods that are easier to digest, but she does not really expand past that on a systematic way of introducing these foods back into the diet. So I know, at least you guys probably have had this experience as well. Families will come into clinic and they'll still be on the intro diet for weeks and weeks on end, waiting for symptoms to improve as the child is losing a lot of weight. So you'll see with our beginner's SCD, we've extrapolated the concepts from Elaine Gottschall and with the concept of these foods being the most easily to digest. You can see that we've included foods from each food group to ensure that the child can still have a nutritionally complete diet, including fats, oils, to help with the calories as well. On the bottom, you'll see that part of the modification for the easily digestible portion are that fruits and vegetables should be ripe, peeled, and cooked. They can be blended in a smoothie, which would make it more easy to digest. You don't have to necessarily cook the fruit and then put it in the smoothie, for example. But if they're eating it raw, it needs to be cooked. Ripe spotted bananas and avocado can be raw. Meats, eggs, poultry, fish can be cooked in any way except for deep fried at this point. And a key thing to note, and that's why it's in all caps, is that we want patients to move through the beginner's SCD within 2 to 3 days. So by day 3 on the beginner's SCD, they should be ready to transition to our next stage, which we've called the full SCD. So our stage 2 is titled the full SCD for the produce study, and everything that is legal on the SCD is legal at this point. So you can see the additions we've made for each food group, including condiments and other. And by this point, patients should stay on this stage for another 2 to 3 days at most. For the patients that are on the strict SCD arm, this will be their final stage for the the remaining weeks of this arm. For those that are going onto the modified and have been randomized into the modified SCD group, they will advance to our 3rd stage. You can see at the bottom here, fruits and vegetables can be given in all legal preparations, as well as meat, eggs, poultry, and fish can also be given in all legal preparations. Next slide. So here's our modified SCD again. For those that are on the modified arm, and all patients in the study will be on the modified arm at some point. A couple times they'll be on this arm. They will reach this stage by day 5 to 7. Kaylee did a great job of explaining kind of the foods that are on the modified, in addition to all of the legal SCD foods and the serving amounts that we would like for them to have each week. So I won't go into that. The main take home is this stage should be started by day 5 to 7. You need to tell families that, because if they look at other resources, they may say, oh, we need to stay on these stages until symptoms improve, and they may read about that, which is right. It's really important to say for weight and overall health, we really need them to reach this final stage by day 5 to 7. Next slide. And now we'll jump into weight monitoring, which is an aspect of the SCD that I'm very passionate about. And we've developed a handout, which is in the next slide, that you guys can review in the toolkit. A little bit on the next slide about the handout. And I'll kind of approach this slide from 2 avenues, one being kids that are underweight or at risk for malnutrition. Definitely need to adhere to this, and then we'll talk a little bit about kids that are well nourished. So for kids that are underweight, malnourished, etc., it's imperative that they have 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks per day. And a huge tip that helps with this weight is that it's important for them to eat a protein and fat at each meal, and ideally each snack. This helps with them feeling overall satisfied, but it also really helps with the weight gain piece. And we find that if kids stick to this recommendation and really implement it, their weight will improve or at least be maintained, as long as their inflammation is not getting worse. All fruits and vegetables should have a high calorie topping or dip. That's kind of like, I call it your topping you need to have for calories. For example, we know bananas or apples with some sort of nut butter or sun butter, veggies dipped in white bean hummus or SCD legal ranch dressing. I have a lot of kids that have brought me diet logs over the years, and I look and they say, I'm starving, this diet's so hard. And I say, well, that's because you're only eating fruits and vegetables all day, or you're having, a little chicken breast here and not really putting in the time to adhere to these recommendations. So it's something I really hone in on when giving an education. One of the hardest aspects of the diet, I feel, is when kids are out and about and they find that they don't have any snacks that they've brought with them or prepared in advance, and then they feel like I have nothing that I can eat, whether they're traveling on a trip or they're at their baseball game and they're starving, and that usually happens to be the times that they eat off the diet. Baked goods, we'll talk more about tips, but having baked goods ready in the freezer, batch prepped and cooked items is key to success in this. We anticipate that weight loss will occur in the first 2 weeks of transitioning to this diet, but patients should gain it back thereafter. So the weight loss portion is very important. And I know as dietitians, anthropometrics is one of the key aspects that we look at when evaluating our patient. but especially when these patients have are already predisposed to weight loss and nutrient deficiencies, and then they're on a restrictive diet. I just think this is one of the key areas we look at during our visit. For patients that are well nourished, going on to the SCD, I do not focus as much on the snacks. I do say try and get about 2 snacks a day or more if you want. And eating a protein and fat at each meal will really help you feel more satisfied. But I don't necessarily go into like the high calorie fats that we can include at each meal and snack time. Next slide.
So as Kim mentioned, weight monitoring is a really important part of standard of care for inflammatory bowel disease, and especially for the kids with IBD who are on dietary therapies. So the study criteria that we developed is that if a child loses 5% of their body weight at any time during the study, they would require active management. So that might mean more clinic visits to meet with the dietitian, additional weight checks, etc. And if the clinician feels that it's needed for from a health perspective, then they may recommend that the child be withdraw from the study. And then if a child loses 7.5% or more of their body weight during the study, then it's an automatic withdrawal. Next slide. So here is an outline of the study protocol with stars to indicate either required or suggested weight check-ins. And you can see, oh, what happened to all the stars? I'm sorry, there has been a change in this image. There should be a star like under, there should be additional 4 stars. There we go. Thank you. So the blue stars indicate required weight checks in clinic, and the green stars indicate that the weight check is strongly recommended during phone check-ins with the dietitian. You can see that at the beginning stages of the diet, there are more frequent weight checks, and then it kind of wanes off a little bit toward the end as we know that a child and a family is more more able to, that has more recipes under their repertoire, excuse me. And then the next slide is basically the verbiage that we just talked about, so you can refer to that at a later time. And I'll skip this slide just for the benefit of time.
My other area of passion when counseling on the SCD is nutrition adequacy. And when we first had families approaching us at Seattle Children's Hospital, 5-6 years ago, one of my biggest concerns was, and I know my colleagues as well, was, is this diet nutritionally complete, as well as, is it going to lead to the weight loss? So we've done a lot of research, well, it's all relative, small studies, but we've looked at the nutrition adequacy, and we're learning more over time. So next slide. As part of the pre-work materials, we encourage you to read through this article that was published recently for one of our studies looking at the nutrition adequacy of the SCD. And before this study, we did have some ideas of what to counsel on and what to modify for patients going on to the diet, kind of what to highlight. But patients are their own individuals and they will eat what they want. So we still have these results. And in this study, our control group was the NYFS, which stands for National Youth Fitness Survey, completed by the NHANES group several years ago. And they completed 24-hour diet recalls for about 600 individuals, and then assessed the intake and compared the intakes of these individuals to the DRIs. So we did the same thing. We captured diet logs in our studies and compared the intakes that were input into our nutrition analysis program to the DRIs, and then our statistician compared the results to the NHANES control group. So in red, you can see that those are, I wanted to kind of capture the percentage, or the nutrients that were much lower in our group than the NHANES group. So you can see that vitamin B1 was less in our group. So 37% of patients that were in our study met the DRI for B1, whereas 79% of the NHANES group met the DRI for thiamine. And yes, B1 is thiamine, and it's a nutrient, as most dietitians will know, that is found in fortified grains and cereals. So we don't have a lot of that on the SCD, as grains are completely illegal. So thiamin's also found in some legumes, in some meats, various nuts and seeds. And so I really encourage families, because most of the micronutrients actually come from the fruits and vegetables, as we know, but also from the nuts and seeds. So vitamin D, calcium, and phosphorus were also lower in our group. You can see that intake for vitamin D was not much higher in the control group. We know with patients with IBD, they're more prone to avoiding dairy in their diet. And the SCD diet is also limited already in what we have to offer as far as dairy. And many kids won't eat the yogurt unless it's like slathered in honey or put in a baked good or in some other form. A lot of our patients were on a supplementation, which wasn't captured here because some of them were inconsistent. So we just left that out. Calcium was also lower in our group. So we'll talk more about how to implement some of these nutrients and items that we're talking about here. And phosphorus is also in dairy, so we would anticipate that was lower in our group. Vitamin B9 or folic acid, vitamin C and vitamin A are in a lot of dark leafy, colorful fruits and vegetables. So there were actually quite a few nutrients that we were surprised at were reasonably or statistically significantly higher in our group than the control group, given our kids are eating on the SCD a ton of fruits and vegetables. Vitamin A, we'll talk about a lot in the next slide too, also comes from not only fruits and vegetables, but as we know, comes from some animal sources as well, like eggs. Vitamin E is abundant in almonds and some other legumes. So a lot of our kids are eating a ton of almond butter and a ton of almond flour. So they rocked it for vitamin E intake. Vitamin K also in leafy greens. Magnesium is in like peanuts, for example, and some of those legumes. And selenium as well, and is as well in some nuts and also in plants that are in dirt. Next slide. So from kind of the results of the study, and also as Kaylee mentioned, we have our probiotics on here, and the supplements that we have identified to be the closest to being SCD legal will be on this handout. And I hope that you guys find this helpful, because it's one of the #1 questions we get. I know for second opinions coming from afar to our clinic, they always ask me, what supplements should they or should they not be on? So please look that over. Next slide. So vitamin D and calcium. From the table previously, we saw that it's low for kids on the SCD. So I've attached the UCSF calcium table, and I want you guys, when you're looking in clinic at your patient and at their diet history, to identify, okay, do they have a good intake of calcium? How much is this? And to do that, you need to know, how much calcium does a serving or 1 cup of yogurt contain? How much calcium does 2 ounces of cheese contain? So an easy reference is right there. You can just click on the link. If you find that your patient is not eating any of the dairy, they avoid dairy altogether, or very limited, I would recommend that they supplement with calcium, because we need to build those bones. Vitamin D we'll talk about more in a second. B vitamins, as you saw, as we know, are found in a lot of the leafy green veggies and the legumes. So if you find that a kid just really isn't eating a lot of fruits and veggies and they're really protein and fat heavy, I would recommend doing a B vitamin. Iron is controversial in the SCD world. Elaine Gottschall, when she initially published her book, discouraged supplementing with iron, as it can be more irritating on the GI tract. So for kids that are on the SCD, we've usually implemented this diet for kids with mild to moderate disease. So they are anemic, but not necessarily symptomatic. So we do not usually supplement with iron. But if they are having symptoms, or they're significantly anemic, you're going to discuss that with their main GI provider, and definitely supplement iron if it's indicated. Next slide. Vitamin D required its own slide. Just like it's popular in the medical world, it's popular in discussion here as well. At our clinics, as standard of care, we check a vitamin D at baseline. And then if a patient is deficient, we will begin supplementation based on our formulary or clinical judgment for that patient. And then we'll follow up with a follow-up vitamin D 25 hydroxy level within 3 to 6 months, usually, or based on kind of as needed, based on their baseline level, how deficient they were, their diet, if they're getting very much vitamin D, if they're outside or if it's winter. So we recommend that for all of your patients, you check a baseline vitamin D and then discuss with your physician if you think that supplement or provider, if supplementation is indicated and when to follow up on that. It's not one of the tests that we are covering for in the study, but we encourage it as a standard of care. Next slide. Other considerations. So I mentioned vitamin A, in our study that we looked at, vitamin A intake was very high, and most of that was because of all the fruits and vegetables, but also all of the eggs that our patients are eating. So kind of going back to nutrient metabolism 101 for dietitians, recall that the preformed vitamin A has an absorption rate of about 70 to 90%. This is the form of vitamin A that can be toxic, and it's the form that's usually found in micronutrient supplements like tablets or capsules. And also it's the form that's found in oral shakes like Boost or Pediasure. Any of those standard oral supplements will usually have this form of vitamin A. So if a child's on a supplemental dose, in addition to eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and a lot of eggs, we have checked levels for a few kids in our clinic that fall under that kind of umbrella. And thus far, all of their levels for vitamin A and RBP have been normal. So it's something that we think of. And if you're questioning their intake, I would recommend checking a level, getting a vitamin A and an RBP. The provitamin A only has an absorption rate of 20 to 50%. And this form of vitamin A comes from the carotenoids, so more of the plant sources of vitamin A, and they are not likely to cause toxicity in high amounts. Toxicity signs and symptoms to be mindful of are very similar to symptoms seen in IBD. So it can be confusing at times. Again, we haven't had any toxic signs or symptoms in our patients, and we've seen many, many, many on this diet. I'll let you read that list on your own for sake of time. So next slide. We'll move on to our parents here.
Hi everyone, so my name is Catalina. I'm a 20-year-old college student and I have Crohn's disease, and I've been on the diet for about 6 years. So I want to talk a little bit about how I present the diet to people either who are wanting to do it, who come to me for support, or even my friends who are asking about why I'm doing what I'm doing. So really, I try to motivate anyone who I talked to about the diet with a positive outlook. So making sure to acknowledge that there is a learning curve when it comes to it. So it's not kind of like a immediate, you can't really move into it immediately with ease, but it's a simple diet to follow, and it's a healthy diet to follow. And it's not really as difficult as it seems. So again, really focusing on what you can eat rather than what you can't eat. So when people ask me why or how I'm doing the diet, I don't necessarily say like, oh, I can't eat grains, I can't eat processed sugars. Rather, I say, so basically what I eat is simply cooked animal protein, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and aged cheeses. And that's pretty much it. And focusing it on it like that, I feel like gives patients and families a more positive outlook on the diet. And it's worth acknowledging that the world today is a lot more prepared to accommodate special diets. So whether that comes in the form of food allergies or paleo or gluten-free, I spend a lot of time walking into health food markets in different places, and the number of options that there are for tons and tons of diets, as well as how willing restaurants and other people are to accommodate special diets, has grown substantially in the past 5 years even. So you can go on to the next slide. Thank you.
When Kat finished her talking about her slide, whoever is next, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, I was muted.
Thank you, Giselle.
So I'm Giselle. I have both kids with Crohn's, and we have been on the diet for over 5 years. And the key to our success, I would say, is planning. And it cannot be emphasized enough. Snacks is a big part of that planning. Always having something with you, whether it's a fruit or a package or dry fruits, nuts with you, helps on the weight loss, but also avoids frustration from the kids of being hungry and where to get the next food. So having snack with you is extremely critical in your purse or in the car. Meals, Sherry will talk about meals more, but is understanding what type of parent support and how much they need to plan regarding their meals will be a good idea, and Sherry will expand on that. Sleepovers or parties, basically calling ahead seems to work, and referring your families to calling ahead to their friends. What are they making? What are they doing? Trying to duplicate something similar seems to work for us, or in our experience. Or if you cannot match it because they're making, I don't know, something that you can't match or don't have all the ingredients, making them the favorite food seems to work for us, because then the kids are more excited about the food that they have than what the other people have. Birthday parties is the same. Again, is my kids carry their own food. They bring their own cupcakes for any kind of birthday party. Family gatherings are about, we tend to eat before we go. So encouraging your families to eat before they go to some sort of get together helps with the food. I also, once again, call ahead and see and I offer to bring something. So at least we know there's at least one food that that is safe for the kids and us to eat. In regards to schools, 504 is very helpful for all this, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And it allows us to have a frozen cupcakes for emergencies at the nurse's office, for example. Or you can bring in some snacks for the teachers for rewards or things like that that are non-perishable. And we give some ideas for all this in our handout that is titled How to Manage Social Activities. In regards to dining out, Kat already alluded to all this. Restaurants tend to be very accommodating. Grill things tend to be the safest route to go. Grilled vegetables, salads, bringing your own salad dressing or just oil and vinegar is a way of managing dining out and having somewhat of a social life, or if you're traveling, which leads me to the next thing of traveling. So if you're traveling and getting meals out, being able to keep it simple in your meal ordering and emphasizing the foods that you cannot have seems to work better. And the last tip on traveling is getting a hotel room that has some sort of kitchenette or refrigerator, so you can bring your food or some of the food with you, or renting some sort of house are usually the best option in the traveling world. So with this, I think Sherry will get the next slide.
Hello, everyone. This is my name is Sherry. I'm a parent of a 14-year-old with Crohn's disease, and as a family, we've been following SCD for about 2.5 years now. Started off just gluten-free, and then went into the full SCD and doing very well on it. So the next couple slides are a little bit more specific, a lot of just tools for success that you can share with your families. a lot of this information, Giselle and I and others, we found online, and our mission is to try and help make it a little bit easier and quicker for those, especially starting the produce, to have at their fingertips with the resources that we're going to lend. But just some of our tips: batch cooking, of course, nobody likes running out of things, and so that's a really important time saver for our family. So whenever we're making recipes like muffins or waffles or cookies or any breads, I triple batch make those things and put them in the freezer, so they're always there when we need to pull them out and just heat those up. Waffles are very popular around here at our house. We also, I make beans a lot. Beans are very filling. We love beans, so those are something that I cook and freeze big gallon Ziplocs of beans to have to pull out for meals. And of course, as well, anyone can benefit from double batching dinners or meals and putting them in the freezer to have when you don't have time to cook next time. So that's definitely a big thing. And for many of us who are fortunate to have a Costco not too far from us, that's also a great resource, because frozen fruit, we use a lot of frozen fruit. We do a lot of smoothies. We make our version of ice cream, the big giant bags of frozen fruit, much more affordable and organic even in Costco. As I said, when we make smoothies, which we do a lot, we make extra smoothie and freeze them into popsicles. So those are always there in the freezer, again, when we don't have time to make things from scratch or if we're rushing around. But then moving into staples to have on hand, that of course will vary from family to family. For us, eggs are always on hand. Always want to make sure we don't run out of eggs. Boiled eggs also are a good snack for on the go. Almond flour, and we'll have this on some of the produce resources on the Nimble website, where we have some recommended preferred brands, or you can buy a 5-pound bag of almond flour so you don't run out. And we have some recommendations of where to go for those. Coconut milk, and of course just having yogurt, bananas, nuts. A lot of nuts and cookies on hand are good, just daily staples to have on hand. As far as kitchen tools go, I think the yogurt maker we touched on already. Of course, that's an appliance for $30 that was worth every penny. We use it every week. Most kitchens, if they don't already have a blender, we use a blender a lot, again, for smoothies and sauces and batters. The blender is our friend. We make our desserts and stuff in the blender, and my son is the self-professed smoothie king here in the house. Also, a mixer and a food processor are good to have. Those are just sort of the typical items that we find to be very helpful. That would be great if people had. I wanted to touch a little bit on creativity. As we made a decision as a family to embark on with SCD and doing this for the health of our son and for all of us, it's all hands on deck. And so we felt it was very important that everybody, have a role to play. So we involved the kids in not only looking for recipes, finding things that we want to make online, but also helping in the kitchen. So my daughter does the chopping. She's really good at that. Again, my son and the smoothies. He enjoys making his concoctions. And we even make it fun where sometimes we'll ask them to rate the recipe. So, if it gets a thumbs up, great. I make a copy of the recipe and we put it in a little binder that I keep. Of course, there were many fails that no one liked how it tasted, so we don't want to make that one again. But involving the family, so it's not all just on one person in the kitchen, is really important for us. And then also keeping the meals pretty simple. So some recipes can be complex, and so for those that are not as adventurous, it's really not that hard to keep it simple. Chicken can be many different ways with a different sauce. So a lot of times it's a chicken or a shrimp with a different sauce from the night before, and roasted vegetables in the oven, and again, beans. We do love beans. And so again, we don't want families to be really intimidated with some of the recipes that they can find online with 50 ingredients. Keeping it simple sometimes is better, but it's always fun to mix it up. As I mentioned, I like to keep a binder of the recipes that we like as a family so that I can just quickly reference those whenever we want to know what to make for dinner that night. And as Kaylee mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to do substitutions. So many recipes online. Simple substitutions can transform a recipe that's not legal to one that is SCD legal. Next slide. Okay, so as far as support goes, we know there's going to be many questions as this study goes along, and currently we are working on the easiest way to best funnel questions from you all, from parents and the patients, out to our team so that you can get answers quickly. And so we will let you know about the protocol for that soon as it becomes available. We will send that out to everyone. But there's so much support. Of course, the Nimble website for everyone is going to be a wealth of information. And of course, parents that are involved with the produce team will also be a support for participants. But I just wanted to touch on the SCD Family Facebook page, which has been an amazing, incredibly rich source of not only information, but inspiration and motivation for families all over the country. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families that post on this really great forum to not only address diet questions and specific products, but it really does make you feel that we are in this together, we help each other, we're motivating one another, we're cheering each other on when someone has a great outcome after a few months on the diet, or just again, emotional support. And I even like to share some of the things that I read on there too with my son and the whole family. It really is a great exchange, and it's closed, and it's the people that manage that page make sure that you know, there's no solicitation going on. It's a safe place for SCD families to really share what's working. Great pictures, recipes. It's just a wonderful resource for everyone that is doing SCD, and we will definitely like for you all to really direct your families to take a look at that and join that Facebook page as soon as they're interested in signing up.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So tying this together, we have some clinic examples here that we wanted to get some discussion going, but for the sake of time, I want to respect everyone's time. I really want to get to questions that you might have. This is not the last time that we will be able to do questions, or we could do follow-up sessions also to go over some things, but I wanted to check with Michelle to see if there are questions that have come in that we could look at, and if not, then we can jump into these.
That's perfect, Kim, because I was just going to suggest the same thing, as to take questions. So looking forward to it.
We do not have any questions from participants right now. There's one thing we can mention towards the end, but if anybody has a question that they haven't typed in, do you want to raise your hand now and we'll do a quick look? We don't see any hands up. We can go on. We don't see any hands up except for Jennifer. Oh, Jennifer Smith, you've had your hand up for a while, so we did not count that as a new hand. I don't know if you want to, if you do have a question, leave it up. If not, you can put it down. Okay, we are not seeing any questions right now. So if you would like to go on.
Perfect.
With your presentation, that would work good.
We'll start with scenario 1. So we have an 8-year-old female who comes into clinic. You find that she's a vegetarian with allergies to all nuts except for almonds. So I wanted this to be a discussion, but we'll see how it goes. First of all, do you think the SCD would be doable for this patient? Part 2 would be, what are some other kind of questions that you would have for this patient? I wanted to see if anyone has input.
Michelle, should we unmute the participants, or how would this work here?
It might be, that might give a lot of background. I think it might be best if somebody could raise their hand, and we could maybe do it in that way.
Perfect. Any of our awesome dietitians have thoughts or ideas for this patient interested in the SCD?
Kim, do you want to move forward with the points we're talking about?
Yeah. So
might be really difficult.
that we would think about are the nutrients that would be a concern with a vegetarian. You know, iron, B12, zinc, manganese, magnesium. This patient, if they wanted to do the SCD, might need a multivitamin if they're lacking, but some good sources of iron, for example, as we know, would be beans. This patient may need an SCD complete multivitamin. Some other key aspects of the diet that I would inquire about are, you know, willingness to eat fruits and vegetables, and does this 8-year-old have a good source of SCD yogurt or SCD dairy that she'd be willing to eat, like the yogurt or cheese. And if that was the case, this diet is definitely doable for a vegetarian. We just have to kind of comb through some of the other details and really look to see if anything might be missing if she were to start on the SCD. And also another point to consider, is she vegan, or is she does she eat fish and eggs? As we mentioned, being a vegan is exclusion criteria for the study, given the amount of restrictions and eliminations they would have to do.
And just because she's allergic to almonds doesn't mean that she can't use other nuts to make some of the nuts breads and baking goods.
Yeah, other way. She's allergic to all nuts except almonds. So yes, they could use almond flour.
Oh, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, scenario 2.
So scenario 2, if you had somebody on the low FODMAPs diet and they wanted to start on the SCD, can you go to the next slide? I just have an illustration here. So many patients who have inflammatory bowel disease also have irritable bowel syndrome and lactose intolerance. And in having those, they may want to avoid foods that worsen these symptoms. And lots of them use something called the low FODMAPs diet, which is focused on foods that are low in fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And I get a lot of this in doing these consults because the patient is on the low FODMAP and now wants to start the SCD, and they'd like to know if they can still maintain the low FODMAP on the SCD. So you can see on the left-hand column, foods to avoid on the low FODMAP diet. There are a bunch of foods that you're supposed to avoid in the FODMAP, but the blue means that it's SCD legal, and the red means that it's not. On the next column, foods that you can have on a low FODMAP diet, you can see that there are lots of foods in red that you can't have on the SCD. So in order to have both a low FODMAP diet and an SCD, you're only looking at the blue foods on the right-hand column. And although I included only a few examples, it does illustrate the point that low FODMAPs is not the same as SCD, and trying to combine the diet eliminates large food groups that might then lead to incomplete nutrition. Can we go back to the other example? Actually, you know what? It's 226. Michelle, what would you like to do?
We did have one question come in, and so why don't I read that, and then you all can answer that, and then if we have any other questions, we should probably answer those and before we wrap up. So the first question is, just to clarify, do you only do the stages for the first diet period, or do you need to repeat the staging for the other diet periods?
Great question. Yes, I failed to mention that. So patients will only do the staging when they first start on the diet. So once they switch over to the other diet arm, after the first 8 weeks, they will not need to redo the staging. they will be able to go straight onto the next diet, whether that is the modified or the strict SCD.
Okay, thank you. And then we have Fong Lu, your hand is raised. We will unmute you, and you can go ahead and ask your question. I think you are self-muted, actually. Okay, there you go.
Hi, this is Fong Lu. My question is, what is the average increase in cost for groceries for families interested in pursuing this diet?
That's a really good question, and I think it depends on what type of foods they're eating. So, for example, a bag of almond flour might cost about $7 to $10, depending on the store you go to, but it's a pretty small bag that might make, parents help me out, how many cookies would that make? Like a small thing from Bob's.
Most recipes call for about 2 cups of almond flour. And so those small Bob's bags of flour probably only have about 4 cups in them. So,
okay. So you're talking that much money compared to like $2 of like a whole gallon of flour.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't, that's a really hard estimate, and I think if that is a really big concern, we might need to explore that as a group and kind of figure out how much a typical week might cost.
We've also looked at that a little bit, Dr. Suskin and myself, when we've done the diet. When I've done it with my husband, it was about $50 to $100 more per person per month. Trying to buy things in bulk. So buying the big almond flour from Costco, buying, things, the big honey. Some months are more expensive when you have to get those bulk items, but that was a rough estimate of what it was.
And then one other consideration is at the beginning of the diet, lots of kids have this insatiable appetite because, as Kim mentioned, sometimes the foods are not as filling. And so, for example, my husband, who granted is a grown man, when he started, he would eat literally an entire wild-caught salmon fillet from Costco, which by himself was $50. And like my serving would be a slither of it. So we have to talk about portions too. So it's definitely different from person to person, I would say.
Sorry, can I ask another question as well? And this pertains to natural sweeteners. I know honey is allowed, but are natural sweeteners like stevia or those types of sweeteners allowed?
So saccharin is allowed in small quantities. She did not list exact quantities per day or week in her book, but it is allowed in small amounts. As far as stevia and the other artificial or the other natural or artificial sweeteners, for the purposes of the study, we've excluded it only because it's been excluded in the SCD community. Because the book was written so long ago, right, stevia was not available back then commercially, so it was not included in the book. But as a whole, the SCD community does consider it illegal in most cases.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there might be one more coming in.
Perfect. We'll wait for that one, and then we'll let everyone wrap up.
This is from Sujata. Are organic foods encouraged more on this study, or are we just encouraging detailed label reading of legal foods?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do encourage organic, especially for the Dirty Dozen, that's fruits and vegetables, and also for the meats. Chicken in particular, you pretty much have to get organic because so many of them are injected, like I said, with those saline solutions or other kind of injectable items like Kaylee mentioned, seasonings, flavorings. So meat's the big one. I tell families, try and stick to prioritize chicken, see what you can do. I know it's really hard to find organic beef. So a lot of families will actually get like a local cow or split it with another family, same with a pig. So we encourage kind of local bulk purchasing of meat if they can. I think local is one of the keys to it, even over organic sometimes, is just knowing where it's come from. And then I always say, do what you can with the fruits and vegetables. If it has a peel or if it's on not on the dirty dozen list, then maybe you don't need to do organic, but try and do organic for the dirty dozen and maybe fruits and vegetables without a peel. Would you add to that, Kaylee?
And I think that does sound overwhelming, sharing a cow, for example, butchering and sharing amongst families in the local area. But so I think, Kim, we should emphasize that it is encouraged but not completely mandatory.
No, most families are doing it together, so it's like bulk.
If it's affordable and you're able to, just as part of a healthy diet in general, that's recommended but not mandatory, Sujata. And then there was one more point I wanted to mention about organic versus non-organic. For the modified arm of the SCD, we do recommend organic, or we really do want the child to do or to use organic brown or white rice, and that's for a very specific reason. Kim, you want to explain that?
If it's not organic, usually it's from afar, and I know there's families express concern of arsenic, and there's been some discussion of not knowing what chemicals it's exposed to if it's from abroad. So a lot of the organic options tend to be more local. Like Costco has a great organic brown rice you can get. So I also encourage look where it's coming from and try to get organic. So we did put that as a criteria for the modified SCD.
So I think that for the future, I think Kim and I were talking, and Giselle and Sherry, we're talking last night about maybe about doing maybe a webinar again, just for like a 30-minute question and answer, once you guys have had a chance to kind of look at all the materials. But we would love to hear from you about whether or not you think that might be helpful. Because I know it's overwhelming to kind of hear all of this all at once and not be able to digest.
So definitely give feedback back on what you would think of that, because I know, questions will come up as the study is rolled out. So we really appreciate you guys, everyone joining us today for this, and we hope this will be helpful.
And this is Heather. I just wanted to make one other point, because I know that this is a lot of information. So I think, Kaylee and Kim's point about giving you some time to digest and then reach out with questions and clarifications is always going to be helpful, because I know it's a lot of information to process. And I know sometimes can get a little confusing because, as Kaylee and Kim both mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's the kind of realities of doing this and how they both do it in their clinical practice and how you might see it described on like Sherry mentioned, the SCD Facebook page. And then there's a component of it that we want to try and standardize, as Kim mentioned earlier, across the study. So for example, as Kim said, with kind of the conversation about the organic meats, that's a lot of what they talk about in their clinical practice. And as Kaylee said, for the study, we aren't requiring that people eat organic, but are, if that's something that they choose to do, we do, recommend it just based on the earlier points and the points that David made originally on the last webinar too, around the effects of processed ingredients and some of the things we don't know that are in food. But although in clinical practice, it's often emphasized, and you might see it on the SCD community site, that organic is quote required for the SCD. For us, for the study, we're not necessarily requiring it, and we can, as you guys come up with questions, we can also put together an FAQ to make sure that those are documented for future reference.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Heather.
Okay, thanks. There have been, I know we're over time, so if people need to get off, there's a couple of questions that came up. For those, if you have time and you want to stay on, we can answer those if the panelists have time. And then just secondly, I know there have been some questions about diet-related questions. Who to contact? You are welcome to contact Michelle Jeffcott-Pera, and I can forward those along, or you to Kim or Kaylee or whomever as needed. So I'm happy to be your point of contact, and then we can go from there, and I can get you in contact with someone from there if you have some specific questions for them, if that's okay. And then the one other outstanding question was, are there any formulas allowed on the study? How about Kate Farms?
Great question. To date, I have not found any legal SCD formula that's pre-made or commercialized. So that's why we really hone in on the smoothies and freezing those, trying to come up with some shakes. So if someone wants to create one and market it, it would be awesome. But even Kate Farms has illegal ingredients on them, unfortunately.
Yeah, Kate Farms is definitely not legal. Her book does mention baby formula, homemade baby formula. So if there is a specific question or you have a patient who really needs formula, I'm sure as a group we can work on it. Although, you know, the criteria for the study itself is for 7-year-olds and above. So.
And
I think exclusion is formula also.
And exclusion is formula, yeah.
And in the handouts, we have some formulas and some suggestions for smoothies for if it's a weight issue, to create smoothies to increase with collagen.
And are you, whoever asked the question, are you talking about the enteral formulas that are used to start to keep a patient in remission or to induce remission in a patient with IBD?
Or is it more for the weight gain aspect?
She says yes.
Yes. So interestingly enough, it is true that enteral formulas can induce remission and keep somebody in remission if used properly over an extended period of time. However, most formulas have maltodextrin and sucrose, and of course those are not legal. And so the question of why somebody on a formula full of sugar and maltodextrin can do well versus on the SCD, that question needs to be answered at a later time. But for some reason, when you mix the dietary therapies, so when somebody's on enteral nutrition and they want to transition on to the SCD, really we work really hard to try to get them off the formula as soon as possible onto 100% SCD, because for some reason together, it doesn't work to keep somebody in remission when you do a combination of formula and SCD, whereas separately it can.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Kaylee. Thank you to all our presenters, and thank you everyone for joining us for the training today. Just as a reminder, I will be sending out the training log for you to sign, and I will also be sending out a link to these slides and the recording of the webinar for those of you who want to take a look at it again, or for the dietitians at your practice that did not attend, so that they can watch it, or others at your practice that are interested. So thank you all. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure. Bye-bye.